You are listening to the CMQ Investing podcast. My name is Chris Franco, and you are about to hear my immediate reaction to the Daily Journal live Q&A that featured Charlie Munger. It just happened. I was live on IG, and I recorded it as part of a podcast that you're about to hear. Now, we'll get to that in just a moment, but before we do, just a friendly reminder to make sure you are following this podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Just take a couple seconds, hit that follow button. Also, if you haven't already, leave a 5-star rating for the podcast. You can do that both on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, a written review goes a very long way. Now, with that out of the way, let's get to it. My live reaction. I think this year's version was better than last year's. And I say that because I think last year, and I heard this from some of you, Charlie seemed, a little bit older last year. It was like he, sometimes I think when you're 98, I think he was 97 last year. I'm sure some days are better than others. All his responses were sharp last year, but he just seemed like he was a little bit more, I can't describe it, but he seemed almost younger this year. So that was good. Covered a lot of topics. I won't try to remember everything he said, and the transcript will be available soon enough. But I know, there were questions of things that we all wanted to know more about. The metaverse, cryptocurrency, passive versus active, inflation, the Fed printing money. At one point, even it was talking about just the challenges that the new generation has that the past generation didn't have, as far as being able to get rich and stay rich. I like something that made me laugh out loud. Charlie was talking about, I think he called these like worthless expenditures. Pretentious expenditures. And he said, who the hell needs a Rolex watch so you can get mugged for it? Which I thought was really funny, in part because, well, to be honest with you guys, I've been toying with the idea of getting a Rolex now for like 3 years, and I actually walked in the store probably a couple of months back, and I still haven't done it. I don't know why, but I think part because I know it's not really a good climate for it. I live in New York City. I don't live in a dangerous part of New York City, but there is a lot of violent crime right now, and I think when you're wearing something like that, it kind of sends a signal. Hey, if you win, you're going to get something nice for it. I don't necessarily want to be doing that. And I realize like the reason, if I really dig into the psychology of it, it is a pretentious expenditure that doesn't really add a lot of substance to my life, but I digress. I think when I look at this conversation that we've just had, it's becoming to a point now where I can almost finish his sentences. And that doesn't mean I know everything he's going to say or that I agree with everything he says, but I can't tell you how much I've learned from Charlie Munger over the years and just how grateful for that, I am. I was actually at a client's a little bit earlier before I got here and started recording, and I'm working with a company that's in the, how do I describe this without giving it away? It's fintech, but they're in the business of having people invest in their strategies. And today I kind of got done with my meetings, my presentations, and I pulled aside the gentleman who's responsible for all the strategies. And him and I went into a room and we just talked for about an hour. I told him about the Charlie Munger quotes page. I told him about the Substack newsletter. I told him about the podcast that you're listening to now. And I just picked his brain. He started his career at Goldman Sachs. He was there for, I want to say seven or so years, working in a really interesting part of the business with a lot of quant-driven investing. A lot of the quant side of investing. And there was I wanted to ask him, where did you learn what you learned? What is your investment approach? Just picking his brain. And in that, though, I was telling him how just the Charlie Munger wisdom has been so useful. And it led me to be much more interested in investing in a way that I didn't think I could ever be. Because I realized in part that the similarity that I feel with someone like Charlie Munger is, I will look at the same thing everyone else is looking at, and I will have a different conclusion, and not all the time, but on certain things. And, I work my job. If I'm right, it's measurable. And so, I have to basically put my money on my own ideas, and my ideas, the real winning ideas, are the ones that, divert from the consensus a little bit. And so it got me fascinated with the investment process and realizing that, some of these really amazing investors, I thought they were kind of one way. And in fact, their thinking is more aligned with the way I think. And I'm not to say that I'm a legendary investor yet, but it was interesting. And I think also beyond that, we started talking about rationality, and he was saying how a lot of his favorite investors, that's the one thing that sticks out is just how rational they are when he reads their writing. And he's not as up on Charlie Munger, obviously, as I am or as we are. So it was funny. I told him the story how Charlie Munger was at a dinner party, and he was sat next to a woman who turned to him and said, Charlie, what's the secret to your success? Tell us about why you're so great. And he goes, I'm rational. And, Charlie has said things like, trying to be rational. It's not just to make more money. It's a binding principle. It's almost like a moral obligation to be as rational as you possibly can. And it's hard. And I think going back to my point about the investment process, the psychology element to me is always so fascinating because, that's what keeps us from being more rational. I don't have a direction with this episode, as you can tell. I just wanted to come on here as soon as I got done watching the live stream of the Daily Journal meeting and the Q&A. I'll tell you what happened, though, during that. I was on Twitter, and I actually got into a little bit of a back and forth with someone who's a journalist for CNN Business. And he actually direct messaged me, which I appreciated, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. But this gentleman was tweeting about some of the things I was tweeting about in real time, but I felt like he was putting this weird spin on it, and I'll tell you exactly what he said. Let me pull this up right now. By the way, if you're not on Twitter, or you are on Twitter, I should say, I'm available on there. It's just my name, at Chris Franco, Franco with a C. If you want to follow me on there, I put up some Charlie Munger quotes. I think if you like this content, you'll definitely like what I'm tweeting about, and it won't be, annoying, which is the opposite of what you want when you follow somebody. But what did this guy say? So if I pull him up here, and I know I'm like doing 10 things at once. Oh, he's following me now. Boom. Winning another journalist over. Okay, so he went off and he started talking about the first of all, climate change. Now I'm reminded. Charlie was talking about climate change. He said that, and this is this gentleman's tweet. He says, Munger saying he's skeptical about whether global warming is as bad as some think it is. Another oh boy moment. So I was like, okay, and I think I responded to that. Then he started talking about, or something that Charlie said about the former leader of China, Deng, and I'm not going to even try to pronounce his name because I'll sound so ignorant. So I guess it doesn't matter because I'm acknowledging my ignorance. But he says, "Whoa, Munger just said that Deng will go down as one of the greatest leaders for economic changes. Go down as one of the greatest leaders for economic changes made during his tenure as head of communist China. Another big oh boy moment." So to that, I wrote, why is that an oh boy moment? And I wanted to write something a lot more, as basically being like, look, typical CNN, because that's when I found out he writes for CNN. And CNN's been, in my opinion, and I don't know why this is, but it's been very negative about, like the news about the dorms that we've done an episode about, the windowless dorm rooms, the controversy. It's not something that you typically, Charlie Munger doesn't make headlines a lot. He's not famous like that, but CNN ran an article about it. And what I talked about and I think is happening is, Charlie's getting put into this narrative of like, hey, it's another like out of touch billionaire that, doesn't get it and who, doesn't care about real people. It's all just, big game to him. This kind of narrative where for those of us who really know Charlie Munger and who have learned from him or through him, that's just not true. But again, taking this idea that, oh, Charlie is praising the former leader of communist China, goes to this narrative of like, oh, Charlie Munger is a China praising commie, which is BS. And it doesn't take a lot of time with Charlie Munger's content to realize that. But he DM'd me, though, and I'll tell you what we said. So he writes me and he says, I get why Munger likes, and again, he initiated this. I get why Munger likes Deng for opening up China, but lavishing praise on the leader in charge during the Tiananmen Square protests could be construed as a bit insensitive. That's all I'm suggesting. Now, look, if someone comes at me and they're rational, respectful, reasonable, I will always mirror that back. So I wrote him back and I said, "Fuck you." No, I'm just kidding. I got to edit that out. I wrote him back and I said, "You're a fucking dead man. I just did a reverse IP and I'll be at your front door tonight, buddy." And then I abruptly exited the chat. No, but I said, this is actually what I said now, guys. I said, I appreciate the DM. I feel like your tweets fit this narrative that Charlie Munger is an out-of-touch, commie-loving billionaire. I said, I'm biased. I have a community of nearly 70,000 Charlie Munger fans. I've learned so much from Charlie, and so have they. So the way that Charlie gets used as an example of a quote-unquote billionaire behaving badly doesn't sit right with me based on my experience with his content. And I wrote him and I said, look, I'm watching the stream and on IG Live, so it's not my best written paragraph, but I think my message came through. He writes back, he says, fair enough. I respect Munger immensely. Don't get me wrong. He's definitely not out of touch, but it seems like he does often gloss over some of the more egregious sins of China, Beijing, in my honest opinion. And by the way, that's totally fair. I think you could totally take that argument, and it's not unreasonable because Charlie Munger focuses on one element of China. I don't think I've heard a lot about, his take on human rights in China. But in terms of answering the questions he's asked, he's Charlie also, I think and again, this is just my perspective, but he's blown away by the progress China made and how quickly they made the progress rather, going from, a nation in poverty to what China is now in such a short period of time, using free market capitalism, but still being communist. And, I think Charlie Munger is someone who likes to observe things and just be objective. So I think he's not thinking like, oh, I better, make sure I say this, because he's just looking at it and giving his take. People need to remember too, I have a little bit of a problem when people try to throw out the commie thing on him, because, as someone who has a lot of family that's been in the military or has served the country, Charlie Munger was in World War II. He was a meteorologist. So, you got to be, I think when you start to call someone like that, a commie, I think that's it's not my place to be offended by it, but I think it's pretty disrespectful, personally. I think, thankfully, I was raised with some good values about respecting your elders. So when I hear Charlie Munger talking, I don't immediately go, oh my God, old guy, dinosaur, can't listen to what he has to say. Because if I had that attitude, I never would have discovered so much of what I've discovered that's helped me, which is, so much of that has come through Charlie Munger. Anyway, I know this is like a very non-linear episode, but I'm trying different things, and you guys tell me what you like, and I try to do more of it. Going back to the meeting, let me look at I have some quotes I wrote down that I'll share with you. And if you have questions, obviously drop them in the queue. For those of you who are listening to this as a podcast, I'm on IG Live right now with our crew. So I said, okay, every time Charlie Munger says something rational, you have to buy another share of Alibaba. That was it's like the Charlie Munger drinking game. He made a quote here, or made a statement here that's very similar to something he said in the past, but he says, the great lesson from the Mungers is that you don't need all this damn diversification. And he was pointing out how, he owns, or his family collectively, they own basically 3 things and some real estate. So we've talked about that in the past, but he was echoing some of those themes. It got into the metaverse and video games, and I thought what he said was really funny. I was laughing out loud when he was talking about this. About video games, he says, some of them can be constructive, and there can be games that are, there's mental benefits of them, but he was kind of harping on the ones that people just get addicted to and start living like a fantasy land that's not really productive. So he says, I don't like anything that's so addictive that you practically give up everything else to do it. And he was saying that there's people playing video games for 40 hours a week. And we all know this is true, by the way. And then about Activision, who has Call of Duty under their umbrella. He says, I don't like it when people spend 40 hours a week being an artificial machine gunner. I thought that was hysterical, because I have some friends who are like that. They think they serve the country based on how often they play that game. I mentioned the Rolex quote. That was great. Let me see if there's a few other quotes here I can draw from. And then I'll answer your guys' questions. Yeah, the Rolex comment was great. He was talking about, back to the Rolex thing, though, this idea of pretentious expenditures. He says, the director's table in the Heinz Corporation cost $600,000. Pardon my language here, but he says, the goddamn director's table. The director's table at Costco cost about $300. They're different places. He did say something. Once I get the transcript, I'll remember it. But he was marveling at how he bought like a stack of flannel shirts from Costco for like $7, and he was really pumped about that. And that's so true. This aligns so much with the generation from which, Charlie Munger is it being of the Depression and just really appreciating a good deal in value, right? Let's see what else I have here. He talked about swimming against the tide. He says, I want to swim as well as I can against the tides. I'm not trying to predict them. And that's in relation to things like macroeconomic predictions and why he doesn't try to make money or try to make them at all. He says that he expects Microsoft and Apple and Alphabet to be strong 15 years from now. At some point, there was a interest. I see Willem says, I thought there was some emotional moment going on between Becky and Charlie at the end. Willem, I didn't see that. I was listening, but I had it up, but I wasn't watching the screen at that moment. If you want to elaborate, I'll talk about it. This is going to be a podcast. So if you're listening to the podcast, that's why, because it's a podcast. All right. He says, in a sense, we need big business. It makes sense to have Apple and Google as big as they are and serving as well as they're doing. Just as I didn't mind AT&T when it ran the whole television network. I don't mind Apple and Google being big companies. Another great thing with, again, listening to Charlie talk, he's got such a long perspective, right? From just being active and around for all these years and decades. I think it's easy to get caught up in the hoopla of right now, and you realize, there's been like parallel times to this, or just, there's not a pattern that repeats, but there's just something about it that echoes. And I don't know, just say, this is like that. And I think that's what he was trying to say. He didn't mind AT&T when it ran the entire television network. And so why would he mind if Apple and Google are, so dominant in 2022? He talked about China. And there was a question, I think this is when I tuned in, about whether, this person was saying they're concerned about investing in China. And it goes very well with what we've talked about, or I've talked about why I'm invested or heavily invested in Alibaba. And he sympathized with the question because he said, look, I understand where the person's coming from. I don't agree with them. But he says the way that this person feels about China, I feel about Russia. And that's why I don't invest in Russia. So, it's ultimately you have to make up your own mind. But that's gives a little bit of clarity for all of you who are looking for him to talk about Alibaba. I don't know if in the earlier part of the conversation that was a topic. But, it gives you a little more insight into how he looks at things. There was conversations about global warming, natural resources. Charlie said that he loves the idea of conserving natural resources. They're all going to be used eventually, and I'm in no hurry to use them up rapidly. And he said that's a very unusual attitude, but it's mine. And I think I get it. He said that I'm in favor of conserving hydrocarbons instead of using them up as fast as possible. Let's see what else. He says that on Congress / insider trading, he says, I don't think we've had big, serious moral lapses in Congress. There may be a fairly scattered amount of minor, I don't know what the rest of this says. Minor, it's typed poorly. I might have to scrap that little piece of it. Okay, what else we have here? I see Willem just responded. He says, really hit me that in any of these days we have to carry on carrying his torch. I think Becky realized the same. I'll have to look at that end. I can pull it up now. Let me see if I can see if she starts crying. I think Becky Quick's just mad that she's not Charlie's wife. I think she loves Charlie Munger. I think if Charlie Munger was like younger and single, Becky Quick, I'm not talking about her personally. I don't know her. She might be married and have kids, so I don't mean any disrespect. But I always feel like they have a very good rapport. And I think she finds him hilarious because she interviews so many people that are just on there to, serve themselves and, say why, no, everything's great with our company and blah, blah, blah. Charlie Munger comes on just dropping truth bombs and literally does not care if he gets absolutely flamed for it. But yeah, hey, Be a Profitable Trader's in the chat. Be a Profitable Trader has been telling me that I have to shave my mustache, which I did. If anyone can see that, you better pay homage to me for that. All right, so let's see what else. I'm trying to see this end clip if I can see Becky get all emotional.
Getting used to it, and I hope you people have too.
Let's see what she's laughing. Oh, she's in love, guys.
Yeah.
All right, I guess we're through.
We are. I want to thank everybody for coming.
I don't know. I'm not so sure there's like an emotional thing going on there, but let's see what else we have here, guys and gals. I'm excited to get the full transcript. I'm excited to, take some of these clips and do things with them for the Instagram page. But what I'm really happy about is now I have a really nice new batch of Charlie quotes. One of the struggles, it's not really a struggle, but the content's not as scalable on the Instagram page because how many amazing quotes are there? Charlie's over the years has been, known for saying relatively little. And, there's certain quotes I could post that I know would get about 10 likes because they're very just really overly, intricate. So I think I've done a good job over the last year or so of surfacing the best ones. But yeah, I needed a something to refresh things here, and this definitely helps. But yeah, again, a lot of the big themes touched on. I'm not surprised by anything he said. I don't think in terms of, I think one area where I remember now he was definitely seemed to be sending like some warning signals about is just, what the second order effects are going to be of just printing so much money and having these practically, interest rates that are practically zero. And he was talking about the Latin American countries and how, and I don't know all the dynamics here, but, it creates an environment where you can have these sort of, your democracy gets severely compromised. And I think that's something, again, being a student of history as Charlie Munger is, he was even referencing something that Plato said, which, I'm going to have to go back. He was also asked a question about who else, he'd recommend people check out for wisdom. Of course, he mentioned Kuan Yew, who we talk about a lot, but someone he mentioned that I've not heard him talk about is Otto Bismarck. So I need to research him. So Otto Bismarck, that could be some research for me that, who knows, it might turn into an episode. There's a question here that asks me, have you read The Tao of Charlie Munger? There are some classic quotes in that book. Yes, I own that book. I could one of my dogs, by the way, if you can hear him, he's having a dream. I can hear him. He's having a nightmare probably. I pulled some quotes from that book, but the quotes themselves are pulled from all over the place. So there's definitely more quotes to be had, but I think the best Charlie Munger quotes of all time are on the Instagram page, and they'll be there forever. So long as, we don't have some weirdo that tries to interfere with that. But, I want this to be a resource for many years to come. Ilias says that Otto Bismarck is a great historical person to study. Okay, CMQ investors, that's the show. The rest of the conversation was about things that weren't about the Daily Journal meeting. And again, what you just heard was something that I recorded live during a Instagram live broadcast through the Charlie Munger Quotes account on Instagram. We're almost at 68,000 followers, which is crazy because Charlie Munger is not famous like that. So what I hear from you guys now, or what I hear from people who are following the page now, is they're actually discovering Charlie Munger through that page, which is something I have to say makes me very proud. And but I don't think many people realize or appreciate that, and that's fine. It just makes me feel good and makes me feel good inside. Once again, this is the CMQ Investing Podcast. My name is Chris Franco. We will talk soon. Later.